Pam Bondi came to defend Donald Trump with rehearsed lines and a winning smile, but Jasmine Crockett's calm, relentless truth shattered the facade on live TV, leaving Bondi exposed and a country staring at a reckoning that couldn't be spun away. The lights were still warming up when Jasmine Crockett walked into the studio. It was early, barely 7 a.m., the kind of hour where newsrooms hum with quiet chaos and coffee cups outnumber conversation. Makeup artists darted between guests, camera operators adjusted rigs, and interns clutched run sheets like life rafts. It was the kind of controlled madness that looked effortless on TV, but always felt like a storm just waiting for the wrong spark. In the green room, Pam Bondi's team was already buzzing. 2 aides hovered at her side, one checking makeup, the other rehearsing last-minute talking points about media bias and witch hunts. Pam herself sat on the couch, straight-backed, sipping from a travel mug with the confidence of someone who knew the cameras loved her once. Her voice floated over the room, bright, insistent, rehearsed. Jasmine took her seat across the room, unnoticed at first. No entourage, no frantic notes, just a slim leather folder balanced on her lap, a pen twirling slowly between her fingers. She didn't need to rehearse. She wasn't here to perform. The air between them was different, even before they spoke. Pam's presence was practiced, her movements sharp and deliberate, every glance and gesture calibrated for audience sympathy. Jasmine's was quieter, but somehow heavier, like a storm cloud that hadn't decided yet where to break. A producer passed through, earpiece buzzing, clipboard tucked tight against his chest. He paused just long enough to glance between the 2 women, then leaned over to another staffer and whispered, low enough to barely carry, "This could get ugly." No one laughed. In the corner, a screen flickered to life, showing a countdown to airtime. 23 minutes, enough time for another layer of powder, another last-minute talking point, another deep breath. Jasmine didn't move. She sat still, pen poised above a half-finished note card, reading the room the way you read a storm front, carefully, without blinking. She didn't need a forecast to know what was coming. She had felt this kind of tension before, in courtrooms, in committee hearings, in crowded halls where the stakes were higher than the headlines. Pam smiled for a staffer's camera, flashing the kind of grin that makes headlines easy. Jasmine just waited, steady as bedrock, ready for whatever came next. Before the cameras, before the countdowns, before the green room buzzed with barely hidden nerves, there was a history written long before today. Pam Bondi had made a name for herself as a fierce defender of Donald Trump when others still danced around him. From Florida Attorney General to Fox News mainstay, she carried his shield proudly, denying allegations, downplaying investigations, spinning legal scandals into persecution fairy tales. She had leaned into loyalty so deeply it had become part of her brand. Not just loyalty to Trump, loyalty to the myth of him, the curated image of the invincible outsider forever under siege. Pam wasn't just a defender, she was a builder, stacking walls around Trump's reputation brick by brick, even as cracks splintered through the foundation. Court losses, political vendettas, fraud accusations, media smears. When others wavered, Pam smiled brighter, talked faster, dared anyone to doubt her certainty. Across the aisle, far from the spotlight-soaked stages where spin reigned supreme, Jasmine Crockett was carving her own path, slower, sharper, without fanfare. A former public defender, then a rising voice in Congress, she didn't build walls, she chipped away at them. One case, one speech, one moment of stubborn, surgical clarity at a time. She didn't drown her points in volume. She didn't pose for cameras after a sound bite landed. She didn't need to. Her victories didn't come with flashing headlines. They came in the silence that followed, when no one could argue with what she'd laid bare. For years they orbited different worlds. Pam in the polished corridors of media spin, Jasmine in the gritty rooms where the fight wasn't for airtime, but for truth. But today, those two worlds were set to collide, live and unscripted. It wasn't just politics that separated them. It was what they believed power should be. Pam saw it as armor, something to wield and defend at all costs. Jasmine saw it as responsibility, something fragile and dangerous when used to protect lies. The country didn't know it yet, not fully, but the conversation about Donald Trump wasn't about to unfold the way it usually did. It wasn't going to be loud, messy, and forgettable. It was going to be cold, sharp, and impossible to walk away from without feeling it in your chest. And neither woman had plans to leave the room unchanged. The red light blinked on and the countdown hit 0. "Good morning and welcome," the moderator said, voice smooth as polished stone. His smile was camera-ready, the kind that barely reached the eyes anymore. Today we're joined by former Florida Attorney General Pam Bondi and Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett of Texas. Pam leaned forward with a gleam in her eye, her posture perfect, her voice bright. She didn't wait for the first full question before launching into her opening volley. "Let's be clear," she said, shaking her head in that practiced way that conveyed exasperation without slipping into outright anger. "What's happening to President Trump isn't justice. It's a political hit job, plain and simple. These so-called investigations, they're theater, an embarrassment to the American legal system." Jasmine didn't move. She didn't even blink. Pam kept talking, her hands slicing the air in tight, controlled gestures, building momentum. "When they can't beat him at the ballot box, they try to beat him in the courtroom. It's un-American, it's unconstitutional, and frankly, it's disgusting." The moderator nodded, teeing up the obvious question. "Congresswoman Crockett, your response?" Jasmine tapped her pen once, softly, against the edge of her folder. Once, twice, 3 times. She didn't rush, she didn't smirk, she didn't meet Pam's escalating energy with her own. Instead, she sat with it, absorbing it, letting the room, and the viewers at home, feel the widening gap between them. Pam smiled sharply, mistaking the silence for an opening. She leaned in. "They're terrified of him," she said, almost gleeful now. "They know they can't stop his movement, so they weaponize the courts against him. That's all this is." Jasmine tilted her head slightly, studying Pam like someone studying a storm through bulletproof glass. She didn't interrupt, she didn't flinch. She just tapped her pen again, software steady, unmoved. The air between them tightened by a degree, not enough to break, enough to make people at home start sitting up a little straighter. The moderator glanced nervously at his next question, sensing the tension he couldn't quite control. He didn't know yet, not fully, that the opening shots had already been fired. And Jasmine Crockett wasn't here to fire back. She was here to level the field with something far heavier than noise. Pam saw the silence as weakness. That was her first mistake. As the next question dropped, something about legal ethics, about accountability, she pounced before Jasmine could even open her mouth. "Of course," Pam said, talking right over the moderator's attempt to direct the conversation. "Congresswoman Crockett will probably tell you all about justice and accountability. But let's be honest, if the shoe were on the other foot, if it were one of her allies under attack, she'd be screaming about due process." She laughed lightly, a sound that scratched at the edges of the room. Jasmine looked at her. Not sharply, not angrily, just looked. The way you might watch a fuse burning down toward a stick of dynamite you didn't need to touch to know it was dangerous. Pam didn't stop. She interrupted again before Jasmine could answer, and again, and again. Each time a little louder, each time a little more desperate, each time revealing a little more of what the polish usually covered up. Jasmine sat still through it all, pen resting quietly on the folder now, hands folded neatly. She didn't cut in. She didn't roll her eyes. She didn't even shift in her chair. And somehow, that silence screamed louder than any retort could have. The viewers at home felt it before the panelists did, a hum under the surface, a ripple of secondhand embarrassment, not for Jasmine, for Pam. because the harder Pam pushed, the more unsteady she looked. The faster she talked, the clearer it became that she wasn't building an argument. She was flailing. Jasmine didn't need to raise her voice. She didn't even need to speak. She was letting Pam spin herself out in real time, the way a storm burns itself out when it realizes it can't tear down what refuses to move. The moderator tried once, twice to steer things back. But the damage had already started. The first sparks had flown. And everyone watching knew it wasn't Jasmine who was about to get burned. It was just a matter of time now. The moderator shuffled his cards, the sheen of stage lights catching the nervous twitch of his fingers. For a second, it looked like he considered skipping the next question. He didn't. "Let's pivot," he said carefully. "President Trump is currently facing multiple ongoing legal challenges, civil suits, criminal investigations, accusations of obstruction. Ms. Bondi, how do you respond to critics who say this isn't just smoke, but fire?" Pam smiled the way someone smiles when they think they've rehearsed the perfect answer. "These cases are nothing more than political persecution," she said, voice sweet with manufactured disbelief. "The Democrats, they can't beat him fairly, so they smear him legally. That's all this is. It's a disgrace." She glanced briefly toward Jasmine, a quick flick of the eyes that said, "Your move." Jasmine didn't blink. She didn't even look away from the moderator. Pam pushed harder. "You look at the facts," she said, leaning forward slightly. "How many investigations? How many indictments with no real outcomes? It's all designed to dirty his name before 2028. That's the plan, nothing more." The moderator nodded slowly, then turned to Jasmine. "Congresswoman Crockett, your response?" For the first time in the segment, Jasmine moved. Not a big movement, just a slow lift of one eyebrow. Measured, intentional, surgical, it landed like a body blow. The audience, those few seconds behind the cameras and the thousands watching at home, leaned in, instinctively sensing that something shifted. Not with noise, not with shouting, with stillness. Pam didn't catch it at first. She mistook the silence for hesitation, mistook the breath Jasmine took as uncertainty, not calculation. "Well," Pam said, voice sharper now, the edges of control fraying ever so slightly, "don't you have a scripted answer ready?" Jasmine's pen tapped the folder once, a single, deliberate sound. She wasn't rushing. She wasn't scrambling for talking points. She was building something slow, heavy, unshakable, the kind of momentum you don't hear until it's already rolling downhill. And somewhere deep down, whether she knew it yet or not, Pam Bondi had just stepped into a conversation she couldn't spin her way out of. Not this time. Jasmine set her pen down. She folded her hands neatly on top of the folder, lifted her chin slightly, and looked not at Pam, but straight at the moderator. "If I may," she said, her voice low but carrying across the studio without force, "I'd like to respond fully, without interruption." The way she said it wasn't a request. It wasn't aggressive either. It was weighty, the way a gavel sounds before the verdict. The moderator hesitated, just for a second, but then nodded. "Of course, Congresswoman, you have the floor." And just like that, the room shifted. Not dramatically, not with gasps or camera crashes. Quieter than that, heavier. The kind of shift you feel before a courtroom delivers a sentence. Before a storm finally breaks. Pam opened her mouth, reflexively, instinctively, but something about the look Jasmine gave her stopped the words in her throat. Not defiance, not anger, just pure, immovable presence. Jasmine didn't rush to fill the silence. She let it sit, let it grow, let everyone feel the weight of what was about to happen. Even the control room caught it, a subtle murmur through headsets, a shared glance between producers. They weren't just watching a panel anymore. They were watching a moment. Jasmine smoothed a non-existent wrinkle from her folder. "You see," she began, voice so steady it made the cameras tighten their focus without a cue. "When someone spends years hiding the truth behind volume, behind deflection, behind manufactured outrage, they forget something very simple." She paused. Not for drama, for precision. The truth doesn't need a stage, she said. It doesn't need a script. Somewhere in the control booth, someone whispered, barely audible through the headset, "Oh, it's over." But on the studio floor, no one moved. No one dared. The breath the audience had been holding wasn't just a reaction now. It was reverence. And Jasmine Crockett, calm, poised, unflinching, was just getting started. Jasmine didn't raise her voice. She didn't lean forward, didn't wave her hands. She didn't need to. She simply lifted a small stack of papers from her folder, a few typed notes, nothing flashy, and set them neatly on the table beside her. Then, without glancing at Pam, without acknowledging the tightening energy across the set, she began. "Let's start with the facts," she said, her voice even, almost gentle. "Donald Trump has been found liable for defamation and sexual assault in civil court, E. Jean Carroll versus Trump, 2023. She slid the first sheet forward like a playing card, software inevitable. "He's been indicted in 4 separate criminal investigations," Jasmine continued, "including charges of falsifying business records, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy to defraud the United States." Another paper, another small click of impact on the desk. "In New York, a judge ruled he committed business fraud by inflating the value of his assets by billions." The moderator blinked. He hadn't prepared for a dissertation. Pam shifted slightly, one heel tapping restlessly beneath the desk. "In Georgia," Jasmine said, "he's facing charges under the RICO Act, charges usually reserved for organized crime." Another document, another silent blow. "In total," Jasmine finished, folding her hands again, "over 90 felony counts pending across multiple jurisdictions." The numbers weren't shouted, they weren't spun. They were dropped calmly, like pebbles into still water, each fact sending a ripple across the studio floor that no one could stop from spreading. Pam opened her mouth, but Jasmine wasn't done. "And that's just the legal record," she said, tone unwavering. "Separate from the documented lies, over 30,000 false or misleading claims during his presidency, according to independent fact-checkers." She lifted her gaze now finally to meet Pam's. Not mocking, not angry, just looking, just daring her to deny what couldn't be spun. "That," Jasmine said quietly, "is not political persecution. It's accountability." Pam's mouth twitched, an almost imperceptible flinch. The first clean hit had landed, and Jasmine hadn't even raised her voice to throw it. Pam scrambled for a foothold. She leaned forward, fingers clenching the table's edge just a little too tightly. "Well," she said, pitching her voice higher, faster, "if we're going to talk about legal troubles, maybe we should look at Hunter Biden. Maybe we should talk about Hillary's emails. Maybe—" Jasmine tilted her head slightly, a small movement that somehow shrank the distance between them without lifting a finger. "You can't deflect facts with noise," Jasmine said, voice low and exact. "You can shout about someone else's sins, but it doesn't erase your own." The moderator tried to step in. "Let's stay on topic." But it was too late. Pam's polish was slipping, sliding away with every desperate pivot she tried to make. "You Democrats," Pam said, almost spitting the word now, "you pretend like you're so pure." Jasmine held up a hand, not to silence Pam, but to quiet the whole room. "No one here," she said, voice almost soft enough to whisper, "pretended anyone was pure. The difference is, I'm willing to say the truth out loud." Pam's face tightened. Her trademark composure, the breezy confidence, the polished media smile, began to fracture, visible even to the back row. Her laugh came out jagged now, nothing like the easy chuckle from earlier. "You're just playing politics," Pam snapped. "You're grandstanding." Jasmine didn't even blink. "I'm reading court records," she said simply. Pam's fingers twitched. She tried to speak again, but the words got stuck somewhere between anger and disbelief. Because for the first time in a long time, Pam Bondi wasn't controlling the frame. She wasn't setting the narrative. She was sitting inside one she couldn't escape, one built entirely from the facts she couldn't spin away. And every second she spent flailing made it that much harder to pretend otherwise. Jasmine could have stopped with the facts, could have left it there, airtight and devastating, but she didn't. Instead, she reached slowly into her folder, the same folder she'd barely touched all morning, and pulled out a single sheet of paper. No theatrics, no raised eyebrow. Just a quiet inevitability to the motion, the kind you see before a checkmate you can't stop. She slid it across the table toward the moderator without breaking eye contact with Pam. "Public record," Jasmine said, her voice almost too even to be comfortable. "An itemized list of Trump's court losses, criminal investigations, and financial penalties, updated as of this morning." The moderator glanced at it, brow furrowing. Even the cameras seemed to zoom in instinctively, catching the tidy rows of fines, penalties, and court judgments laid out in brutal black and white. Pam stiffened. "You defend this," Jasmine said, her voice calm, almost surgical, "while calling yourself a public servant?" No shouting, no smirking. Just a question dropped into the center of the table like a gavel nobody could ignore. Pam opened her mouth. Nothing came out. She blinked, looked at the moderator, then back at Jasmine, searching for a foothold that wasn't there anymore. That's not," she started, her voice cracking on the second word. "You're taking it out of context." Jasmine didn't move, didn't press, didn't even breathe heavy. She just sat there, letting the silence do the work. Pam tried again, her hands fluttering like a drowning swimmer's. "These are politically motivated cases. This doesn't mean—" Jasmine tapped the edge of the printout gently once. "They're court rulings," she said, voice cool as water, "not campaign slogans." Pam's jaw clenched. She turned toward the moderator as if begging for a lifeline. He didn't offer one, not because he wouldn't, because he couldn't. The room was different now. You could feel it, even through the cameras, even through the screens. The pivot was complete. And for the first time in the segment, it wasn't Pam Bondi steering the conversation. It was Jasmine Crockett, steady, merciless, undeniable. And Pam was sinking, live and in real time. The audience wasn't supposed to react audibly, not during a live taping, not during a serious panel. But rules are easy to follow when nothing real is happening. Rules crumble when a moment breaks through. Somewhere in the second row, a sharp breath escaped. In the back, a muffled "damn" slipped out before someone could catch it. At home, viewers leaned in, some with grins curling at the corners of their mouths, others just sitting still, stunned by what they were witnessing. Because it wasn't just that Pam Bondi was struggling, it was that Jasmine Crockett wasn't even trying to humiliate her. She was just holding up a mirror and letting the reflection do the damage. And the country was watching every crack form. Within minutes, Twitter was alive. Hashtags blooming like wildfire. Harsh Crockett crushes, Harsh receipts on deck, Pam meltdown. Clips started circulating before the segment even ended. Unedited, raw, the kind of footage you didn't need to add dramatic music to because the tension was already baked into every frame. Then came the leak. A 23-second backstage clip, grainy, clearly shot by someone with a phone held at chest level, showing a producer pacing frantically behind the scenes, headset pressed tight against his ear. "We need to cut early," he muttered. "This is bad. She's getting flattened out there." Another voice, younger, maybe an intern, whispered back, "Do we pull Pam off set?" "No," the producer said, voice low and grim. "We can't save her now." The clip hit TikTok before the credits even rolled. Within an hour, it had 2 million views and counting. Meanwhile, on the studio floor, Jasmine stayed seated, composed, silent. The calm eye of a storm she hadn't raised her voice to summon. And Pam, normally poised, polished, a darling of controlled outrage, looked like she was holding onto the table just to keep herself upright. The audience had already decided, and no slick statement after the fact was going to unmake what they had just witnessed. Pam Bondi did what people always do when the facts are too heavy to lift. She lashed out. "You're angry," she said, the words sharp enough to sting, but hollow enough to miss. "You're emotional. That's all this is." She said it loud enough for the audience to hear, for the control room to wince, for the viewers at home to sit up straighter in their chairs. It wasn't just an insult. It was a play, the oldest one in the book. Discredit the woman who won't back down. Discredit the black woman by calling her everything but right. The studio held its breath, waiting for Jasmine to react, waiting for the explosion Pam clearly wanted. But Jasmine didn't shout. She didn't even raise her voice. Instead, she tilted her head slightly to the side, studying Pam like a scientist, observing something both sad and inevitable. And then she spoke, soft, surgical, devastating. "Is that your defense?" she asked, almost curious. "Labeling a black woman emotional when you run out of arguments?" The words hit the studio like a slap in church. There was an audible gasp, sharp and involuntary. Even the moderator's mouth opened slightly, caught between shock and awe. Pam froze, caught mid-breath, realizing too late she had said the one thing that couldn't be unsaid. Not in this room, not in this moment, not to this woman. Jasmine didn't press the advantage. She didn't need to. She sat back in her chair, composed, letting the silence stretch out like a verdict, letting everyone feel it. And Pam? Pam blinked rapidly, the shine of righteous outrage flickering into something smaller, something desperate. The meltdown wasn't dramatic. It was worse. It was quiet, visible only in the way her posture sagged just slightly, the way her hands fidgeted with the hem of her jacket, the way her voice, when it finally returned, had lost all of its practiced brightness. The studio wasn't a battleground anymore. It was a reckoning, and Pam Bondi was standing alone in the middle of it. Pam tried to claw her way back. She tried to laugh, a brittle sound that broke apart before it left her lips. "I'm just saying," she stammered, hands fluttering uselessly in the air. You don't have to be so sensitive." The words came out wrong, all wrong. The wrong tone, the wrong message, the wrong century. Jasmine said nothing. She didn't have to. The moderator, sensing the floor sinking beneath them all, jumped in fast. "Okay," he said, voice a little too loud, a little too eager. "We're going to take a quick commercial break." He didn't wait for permission, didn't even finish the sentence properly. The network cut to black so fast it felt like someone had yanked the plug from the wall. But it was too late. The collapse had already happened, live and unedited, before millions of eyes. Pam sat frozen for a second as the lights dimmed and the cameras pulled back. Then she ripped off her microphone, a sharp, clumsy movement, and tossed it onto the table like it burned her fingers. "You set me up," she hissed toward no one in particular, loud enough for a boom mic still recording to catch it. "You set me up." Jasmine stood slowly, smoothing her jacket with the same care she had shown all morning. "No," she said softly, without looking back. "You walked into the truth. All I did was leave the door open." Pam's mouth opened again, but no words came. There was nothing left to say, nothing that wouldn't sound small. The control room flooded the feed with a commercial for allergy medication, cartoon flowers, and fake sneezes. But the audience wasn't thinking about allergies. They were already rewinding the moment, clipping it, posting it, setting it to soundtracks of slow applause and whispered finallys. Because you can spin a lot of things in politics, but you can't spin a reckoning you built with your own hands, live, permanent, and echoing far beyond the walls of a studio. Pam Bondi didn't just lose a debate. She lost the narrative, and Jasmine Crockett never even had to raise her voice to take it. The clip didn't just spread, it detonated. By the time the first commercial break ended, the footage was already bouncing across timelines, stitched into TikToks, flooding Twitter feeds, and dropped into group chats with one-word captions like, "Finally," "Watch this," "Overdue." It wasn't just political junkies passing it around. It was teachers, it was nurses, it was middle schoolers at bus stops with AirPods in, their heads shaking in disbelief. Within an hour, hashtags dominated the trending lists. Jasmine Crockett, truth teller. Pam cracks, receipts over rhetoric. Let the record speak. And it wasn't just the usual echo chambers. Major commentators, the kind who usually rolled their eyes at viral moments, leaned in. On MSNBC, one anchor called it the moment the spin machine broke down on live TV. A CNN panel described Jasmine's composure as clinical, devastating, the kind of restraint you can't fake. Even conservative outlets struggled. Some tried to frame it as an unfair ambush, but even their hosts winced replaying Pam's meltdown because the receipts were there, typed, stamped, undeniable. Late-night comedians jumped in too, but cautiously. There was no cheap joke to make when the footage already said everything better than a punchline ever could. Meanwhile, the raw clip from the green room, the one where Pam hissed about being set up, leaked by midnight. That one sent the conversation nuclear. It wasn't just that Pam had cracked. It was how badly she misunderstood the moment, thinking she could shout over a reality that had already been printed out and handed to the moderator on live TV. Every frame, every glance, every steady word from Jasmine stacked like evidence in a courtroom far bigger than any studio could hold. By morning, the country wasn't asking who won the debate. They were asking a bigger question. What happens when the truth doesn't need a megaphone, just a mirror? And Jasmine Crockett had given them one. Pam Bondi's PR team moved fast, too fast. The first statement hit social media less than 18 hours after the segment aired. A stiff, awkward note blaming selective editing and coordinated ambush tactics for the exchange. It didn't land, not because people didn't read it, they did, but because they'd already seen the whole clip, unedited, unfiltered. No spin could wash away what millions had watched unfold with their own eyes. A woman grasping at noise and another holding her ground with silence and truth. Pam's team tried again, issuing a second, more polished statement later that afternoon. Something about passionate debate and respecting different viewpoints. But the damage wasn't about passion. It was about poise. And there was no press release in the world that could manufacture what Pam had lost. Meanwhile, Jasmine stayed quiet. Deliberately. Networks called, producers emailed, podcasts begged for exclusive reactions. She declined them all. No victory laps, no grand speeches. Late that evening, Jasmine finally posted something. Not a video, not a thread, just a single line against a black background. Truth needs no theatrics. Let the record speak. It was retweeted 100,000 times within hours because people weren't just cheering for a takedown. They were recognizing something they hadn't seen in too long: strength without spectacle, courage without performance. A reminder that sometimes the most powerful blow isn't delivered in a shout. It's delivered with a sentence you can't refute. Pam faded from the news cycle within days. The noise shifted elsewhere. But the clip, and the quiet clarity Jasmine brought to it, didn't fade. It stayed. It echoed. And for those who had watched it happen live, there was no forgetting who controlled the moment and who crumbled inside it. In the end, it was never about winning a TV fight. It wasn't about headlines. It wasn't about trending hashtags. It wasn't even about Pam Bondi. It was about something heavier, something quieter, refusing to let power distort reality without being challenged. Because power, real power, doesn't always announce itself with flashing lights and podium speeches. Sometimes it shows up in the soft spin of half-truths, in the casual erasure of accountability, in the way someone with enough cameras pointed at them believes they can talk reality into submission. And sometimes the only answer to that kind of power is clarity so sharp it can't be blurred, facts so heavy they can't be lifted, presence so calm it becomes unmovable. That's what Jasmine Crockett brought into that room. Not anger, not outrage. Truth, delivered clean, steady, undeniable. The cameras eventually cooled, the headlines eventually shifted. The noise, as it always does, moved on to the next spectacle. But something else remained. The conversation Jasmine sparked didn't fizzle out in a news cycle, it grew. In classrooms where students debated why facts aren't enough without the courage to say them. In quiet dinner tables where parents showed their kids what real composure under fire looks like. In campaign offices where staffers asked if maybe, just maybe, they needed to rethink the way they weaponized narratives against women who refused to perform politeness for acceptance. Jasmine didn't stay in the studio to soak in the fallout. She didn't hang around for high fives or backstage congratulations. She packed up her slim folder, thanked the makeup artist with a quiet smile, and walked out into the cool evening air. Calm, intact, unshaken. Not because she had destroyed someone, but because she had refused to be destroyed by a system built on noise. Because sometimes winning isn't about shouting louder, sometimes it's about standing so still that all the noise collapses around you. And when Jasmine Crockett left that studio, she didn't just leave behind a viral clip. She left behind a blueprint for how you face power when it comes at you reckless and unprepared. You don't yell, you don't flinch, you tell the truth, you let it land, and you walk away, letting the fire you sparked do the rest. This story was brutal, but this story on the right-hand side is even more insane.